By the way, if I were a Republican, I would be reminded of the sign on the entrance of Dante's Inferno, abandon all hope. You're going to get beat so bad in November, you have no idea.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Really appreciate you clicking on this one because what you're about to watch is absolutely wild. So, in this video, we've got Piers Morgan hosting a heated panel discussion where Clay Travis tries to defend recent enforcement shootings, but then James Carville comes in swinging with some brutal predictions about what this means politically. And here's the kicker. Even a former Navy SEAL who's literally been in combat zones says he's appalled by what's happening on American streets right now. The whole conservative argument around gun rights gets completely flipped on its head, and you're going to see exactly how it all falls apart. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for the entire thing because the way this unfolds is something you have to see to believe. Real quick before we jump in, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from today. I love seeing where everyone's watching from around the world. Alright, let's get into it.
On this shooting, Clay, I'm seeing a lot of people on the conservative right who are beginning to pivot away from where they may have initially been on this. The more angles you look at this, the more unequivocal it becomes. No one is honestly now suggesting this guy was brandishing a weapon, trying to attack or assault. There were 8 guys all over him. And then you see one of them reach down, take his legally owned firearm from his side, from his waist, take it away, and it's a second later that they kill him. I mean, that cannot be right.
Look, I think we're going to figure out more details on this. It looks to me like maybe his weapon discharged, that is the weapon that they took from him, discharged. And then there was a panic and a thought that a gun shot had been fired and the reaction occurred. That's my analysis of it right now. I think there should be an investigation. If it's determined that he behaved in a way that was outside the law, then this individual should be charged. And again, I think the real issue here, big picture, again, is how do you get the 10 million that Biden let out? But also, these individuals are going and intentionally obstructing these ICE agents from being able to do their jobs. And this, I believe, is the intent. They want a violent act, whether it's Renee Good, whether it's this individual. There is a desire.
But they don't want to get shot, though, do they? They don't want to get yeah, but Clay, they don't want to get shot.
If you go back and remember, Pierce, the Axios story that came out, I believe it was in July, said that Democrats were instructing people that they did need to have a shooting because politically they saw it as beneficial. In other words, a consequence of trying to get in front of this. And I will just say, look, I am a First and a Second Amendment guy. If the guy, there's a difference between what you can legally do and what you should intelligently do. If I were giving advice to anybody who is going out to protest ICE right now, I would say don't go armed. I think if this guy had not had the weapon that he did, he would have been arrested. He would still be alive. I think there was a panic brought on by the gun being there. And so I think you have to analyze this situation in general. If my own kids were going to protest, Pierce, I would say, okay, do not take any weapons at all. You might legally have the right to do it, but I would tell them that is not a smart thing to do, and certainly
yeah, but you know what? Again,
in the arrest.
Okay, but Clay, before I move to the other two panelists, again, I am struck by an irony here because Renee Good wasn't armed, and it didn't save her, right? And the bottom line is, I thought the position on the conservative right, which is mainly supportive of the NRA, for example, is that actually the answer, say, to school shootings is that everyone should have guns at schools, right, to stop this happening. That would stop it happening. If you take that logic, then after 2 shootings, 2 people being shot dead by ICE agents, wouldn't the logical thing be to do to take a gun, if you're legally allowed to have one, to protect yourself against the same thing happening to you? In other words, is the argument not being put forward here by people on the right who love guns? I'm not going to get into that debate again. Litigated that years ago. We've moved on. It's your country, your debate, your guns. However, it does seem hypocritical to me. It's like this is the completely opposite advice that you would normally give to a which keeps recurring where people are being shot. The normal advice is you should, if you're allowed to carry a gun, take it to defend yourself.
My argument has been my kids all go to schools with armed security. I want trained security with armed guns at every one of my kids' schools, Piers. That's different than someone going to protest and carrying a gun, to me, quite significantly. Because again, if you're going to get arrested potentially, or you're going to get involved with ICE agents, I don't think that the position should be, well, you should take a gun and get into a shootout with them. You shouldn't take up arms against lawful citizens in the country who are executing their lawful jobs.
So Clay, you're against Kyle Rittenhouse?
For my kids' school, I want armed security.
This is the moment where the entire conservative argument collapses on itself. Piers lays it out perfectly when he says, there is no one honestly now suggesting this guy was brandishing a weapon trying to attack or assault. There were 8 guys all over him. And then you see one of them reach down, take his legally owned firearm from his side, from his waist, take it away, and it's a second later that they kill him. Think about what that means. They removed his weapon. He wasn't a threat anymore. And then they killed him. That's not self-defense. That's not protecting officers. That's execution. But here's where Clay Travis completely loses the plot. He actually says they want a violent act. Whether it's Renee Good, whether it's this individual, there is a desire. Are you serious right now? No, you're telling me that American citizens are going out to protests, hoping to get shot by federal agents for political points? That's the conspiracy theory we're running with? And then Clay tries to walk it back by saying, I think if this guy had not had the weapon that he did, he would have been arrested. He would still be alive. Oh, really? Because Piers immediately destroys that argument. He points out, Renee Good wasn't armed and it didn't save her right. Exactly. She had no weapon. She was unarmed. And she's dead too. So which is it? Are we supposed to believe that being armed gets you killed, but being unarmed also gets you killed? What's the actual rule here? Because it sounds like the rule is just if you protest against enforcement actions, you might get shot regardless. See, and this is where the conservative position on guns becomes absolutely indefensible. For years, we've been told that the Second Amendment is sacred, that Americans have the right to carry firearms to protect themselves, that good guys with guns stop bad guys with guns. That's been the entire argument for decades. But now, suddenly, when it's protesters exercising that exact same right, conservatives are saying, well, actually, you shouldn't carry a gun to a protest even though it's legal. You see the problem? You can't spend 20 years building an entire political identity around gun rights and then turn around and say, except in this situation where exercising that right makes you a target. Clay even tries to defend this by comparing school security to protest situations, but that's a false equivalence. School security is stationary, controlled, trained specifically for that environment. What we're talking about here is American citizens exercising their constitutional rights in public spaces. If your position is that carrying a legal firearm in public makes you a legitimate target for federal agents, then you've just undermined your entire Second Amendment argument.
If my kids were going to protest on any issue under the sun and they were going there, I would tell them I would not advise them to take a gun. There's a difference between what you're legally allowed to do and what I would advise as a parent.
So you were against Kyle Rittenhouse. I got it.
I would not.
Yeah, well, Kyle Rittenhouse,
I said at the time, I didn't think it was smart for Kyle Rittenhouse to take a gun to the middle of that crazy riot. I would have advised against my kids doing it. Once he was there, I think the jury reached the right verdict in that case.
Okay, let me bring in James Carville. James, it seems to me this is heading to a very dark place in America. You've got these ICE agents who, for their own self-protection, because they're getting doxxed, they're getting identified, they're getting targeted and so on, they're wearing masks, they're out there. A lot of them apparently do not have proper crowd control training. They're getting into regular skirmishes now with protesters, which are turning deadly. And I think the American people are increasingly appalled by this, which is why you're seeing Donald Trump reining back in this particular incident in a way we haven't seen him before. But this is getting tinderbox stuff, isn't it?
Well, first of all, a fabulous Republican economist, I think his name was Herb Sines, said that which can't continue won't. This is not going to continue. By the way, if I were a Republican, I would be reminded of the sign on the entrance of Dante's Inferno, abandon all hope. You're going to get beat so bad in November, you have no idea. The Democrats are going to pick up 6 or 7 Senate seats. And the idea that somebody exercising poor judgment, which I'm sure I do 10 times a day, is the excuse of someone to shoot me is utterly ludicrous. So people make mistakes all the time. They park in no parking zones, they exceed speed limits, they might drink too much. None of this suggests that you ought to be out shooting people. And honestly, what you have there is a bunch of undertrained, not particularly qualified people with badges and guns. And this is going to be the result of it. The American people don't like it overwhelmingly. Stand by, sit still, and get the crap beat out of you, because that's what's going to happen.
Clay keeps trying to save this argument, and it just gets worse. He admits, there's a difference between what you're legally allowed to and what I would advise as a parent. So you were against Kyle. And there it is. The mask is completely off now, because remember Kyle Rittenhouse? 17 years old, took an AR-15 to a protest. Conservatives defended him endlessly, raised money for him, called him a hero, said he was exercising his Second Amendment rights. But now, when it's a nurse who treats veterans carrying a legally owned firearm, suddenly that's poor judgment? The hypocrisy is absolutely staggering, and Piers doesn't let him off the hook. He keeps pushing on this contradiction, and Clay has no coherent answer, because there isn't one. The position has nothing to do with principles. It's purely about whose side you're on. But then James Carville comes in and absolutely levels the entire conversation. He opens with, "Abandon all hope. You're going to get beat so bad in November you have no idea." And he's talking about electoral consequences, because what Republicans don't seem to understand is that the American people are watching this. They're seeing federal agents kill unarmed protesters. They're seeing federal agents kill armed protesters who were legally carrying, and they don't like it. Carville makes this point brilliantly when he says, "The idea that somebody exercising poor judgment, which I'm sure I do 10 times a day, is the excuse of someone to shoot me is utterly ludicrous." That's the standard now? Poor judgment equals death sentence? You park in a no parking zone, should you be shot? You exceed the speed limit, should federal agents open fire? The logic completely falls apart. And then he identifies the real problem. He says, what you have there is a bunch of undertrained, not particularly qualified people with badges and guns. That's what's happening here. These aren't trained crowd control officers. These aren't people with extensive de-escalation training. These are agents who've been thrown into situations they're not prepared for, wearing masks so they can't be identified, and when things get tense, they're pulling triggers. The historical parallel here is important. We've seen this before in American history. When you give poorly trained forces broad authority and minimal accountability, violence becomes inevitable. That's not a partisan statement. That's just a pattern we've observed over and over again throughout history in multiple countries and contexts.
Rob O'Neill, it seems to me, we've discussed this a lot on the show with various panels. It seems to me most Americans fundamentally agree with what Donald Trump has done on the southern border. They realized it was particularly porous under Joe Biden, that millions came in illegally into the United States. That was unsustainable. And they think it's great that the border's been effectively closed. I also think there's no argument with most Americans about identifying and deporting people who are in the country illegally who then commit other crimes. The flashpoint is on these ICE agents going into cities and going after people who perhaps came in, with their parents, or perhaps came in 10 years ago and built families in America, who are law-abiding, committed no other crimes, who pay their taxes, who contribute to society, who are the bedrock in many ways of the ideology of the United States of America. And that is where this administration, it seems to me, is overreaching and getting into serious trouble. Then you add this series of incidents now involving people being shot dead as they protest against that, and you've got this unholy mess we're in. What do you make of it?
Well, there's a lot to unpack, and it would help both sides if they were honest with each other and not just trying to get political points proven. As a registered independent, I'm absolutely appalled that law enforcement is killing Americans on American soil anytime. And as someone who's been in close armed combat with everyone from Chechens to Afghans to Iraqis to Syrians to our friends in Somalia, no gunfight is the same. And when I walk down the streets of New York, I see people crossing the street without the right of way. Some of them get hit and killed. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. You should be armed wherever you go. And it doesn't matter how many full magazines you have. When you introduce yourself into an ongoing arrest and you're armed, you're just escalating the force. Does the person who got killed by a bus because they weren't looking deserve it? No. Does this guy deserve it? No. It shouldn't have to happen, but we're not being honest. It's like the left is now saying, yeah, they're just coming in and separating children from their families. There should be a way, and I think law-abiding citizens should have a different route, but there are criminals they're going after, and the left won't even admit it. A lot of people in Minnesota voted for this, but the problem in some of the parts of Minnesota is they've infiltrated so many illegal voters. Look at the fraud. And look, again, if I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong and prove it, and I'll admit it. But there's a lot of bad stuff going on right now, and then it's distracting on both.
What makes this segment so powerful is that Rob O'Neill is not some progressive activist. He's a former Navy SEAL. He's someone with actual combat experience. And when Piers lays out the situation, asking him about enforcement overreach and people being shot at protests, Rob says something absolutely critical. As a registered independent, I'm absolutely appalled that law enforcement is killing Americans on American soil anytime. Let that sink in. A Navy SEAL who has been in actual combat zones is appalled by what's happening on American streets. That should tell you everything about how far this has gone. And Rob makes another crucial point. He says, when you introduce yourself into an ongoing arrest and you're armed, you're just escalating the force. Does the person who got killed by a bus because they weren't looking deserve it? No. Does this guy deserve it? No. He's acknowledging that the situation was complicated, that mistakes happen, but that the end result is still wrong. Because here's what people need to understand. We can have a conversation about immigration policy. We can debate enforcement priorities. We can discuss what the right approach is to people who came here illegally but have built lives and contributed to communities. Those are legitimate policy debates. But what we cannot do is normalize federal agents killing American citizens in the streets. We cannot normalize the idea that protesting government actions makes you a legitimate target. We cannot accept that exercising your constitutional rights, whether that's the First Amendment or the Second Amendment, puts you at risk of being shot by your own government. Yeah, that's not a sustainable position for any democracy. And what Republicans are discovering right now is that the American people aren't buying it. The polling shows it. Even conservative voters are uncomfortable with this, because at the end of the day, most people understand that there's a line between enforcement and violence, and that line has been crossed. The reason this matters so much is because once you normalize this level of force against protesters, it doesn't just affect one side, it affects everyone. Today it might be immigration protesters. Tomorrow it could be any other issue. The precedent being set here is that if the government decides you're in the way, violence is an acceptable response, and that should terrify anyone who cares about civil liberties, regardless of their political affiliation. So, what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.